We can think after Napoleon, after the Congress of Vienna, everything remained calm. But what had happened before was something very, very important. So people in Europe, they met revolutionaries, they met the revolutionary French, and then they decided, these liberals in other countries, they decided they wanted to do the same. They wanted a more fair society. So there were a series of waves of revolutions in different countries, and of course in France too. These years, they happened more or less at the same time. In Belgium, in France, in Spain, in Greece, in different countries, they fought for their individual rights. One of the first tiny revolutions, an uprising, happened in Spain in 1820. It was led by Colonel Rafael del Riego, and then they restored the parliamentary monarchy Spain had during the 1812, during the War of Independence. For 3 years, this revolution was successful. In Spain there was a constitutional monarchy, but 3 years later the king asked the help from the Holy Alliance. And the Holy Alliance sent an army, a French army actually, that invaded Spain, defeated the liberals, and restored the king as an absolute king. At the same time, more or less, in 1821, in Greece happened something similar. Greece, it wasn't a country, Greece was a territory controlled by the Ottoman Empire. So they were part of the Ottoman Empire. But they had their own religion, they were Christians, they had their own language, of course, their own history. So they decided they wanted to create a country. They didn't want to be part of the Ottoman Empire because they weren't Muslims and they didn't speak Turkish. So they tried and they rose up, they made a revolt, a big revolution, and they started a war of independence. For this war lasted 8 years, and finally they got their independence. And that was the first wave of revolutions in 1820. A few years later, in 1830, started the second wave of revolutions. First wave started in 1820, second wave started in 1830. There, in France, there was an absolute monarchy after Louis XVI, the last king of the French, his son who died in prison, and then the Holy Alliance restored an absolute monarch who was Louis XVIII. After Louis XVIII, they received Charles X. And this one was an absolute monarch. And people in Paris, they revolted against this absolute king, and then they tried to restore a parliamentary monarchy. But they didn't change the system of government. They continued with a monarchy, but actually a parliamentary monarchy. So here you can see the differences between an absolute king with all the attributes and this absolute power, and Louis-Philippe d'Orléans, who was the successor, the new king, but a king controlled by a parliament and controlled by a constitution. Belgium didn't exist at this time. Belgium was a region that belonged to the Netherlands, to the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and here the Belgians started a revolution to change and to create an independent country. So one of the leaders of the revolution, Leopold, became king of the Belgians, actually a constitutional king. So this territory was divided, and north of the Netherlands was what we know nowadays as Netherlands, and south was Belgium. The Belgium we know nowadays. So this is the first king of the Belgians, so that's Leopold I. There were other revolts and uprisings in Poland and in Russia, but they were completely defeated and oppressed by the government. And now this is the map of Europe, and we arrived to the last wave of revolutions. First wave 1820, second wave 1830, and the last ones were in 1848. And these ones are a bit different because these ones didn't want just to eliminate the old regime or to control the old regime, establish parliamentary monarchies. These waves, this wave of revolutions, they were not only bourgeoisie revolutions, high bourgeoisie revolutions, but bourgeoisie and workers. So they mixed all the third estate together. they wanted not only reforms, but they wanted democratic principles. They wanted to choose, to extend the democracy. And that came into effect in France, because in 1848 this wave of revolutions arrived to Paris, because there the king, this Louis-Philippe d'Orléans, who started as a constitutional king, became more and more authoritarian with the years. And in 1848 a new uprising expelled this king, and then they established a second republic. This second republic, based on these democratic principles, were led by Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, who was the son of Louis Bonaparte, who was the brother of Napoleon Bonaparte. So this one is his nephew, and he became president of the government, but a few years later he became more and more authoritarian, like his predecessor, and became, as his uncle did before, emperor of the Second French Empire in 1852. There were revolutions, uprisings too, in Frankfurt, in Germany, and they tried to establish more democratic principles, but the government, of course, fought against that. So, what did they want, these people, in the 1848 waves? They asked for work rights. For example, the right to strike. So the only way the workers had to fight for their rights was to strike, stop working. But that was something completely illegal. So in 1848, these workers, these people fighting, they asked for this right. And they wanted to working day shorter. Before, working day could be very long. 10 hours, 12, 13, 14, 15, doesn't matter. So they wanted a legislation to guarantee that the working day would be maximum 10 hours per day. So these are, actually they are working conditions, what they were asking for. What did they got, these revolutions, these 1848 revolutions? Actually, they got achievements, not a lot, but a few of them. For example, feudalism was completely abolished in the German states, in Prussia and Austria. These feudal rights disappeared, were eliminated, and in certain countries like France, for example, the universal male suffrage was extended.